A dying man sits in the dust of a forgotten trading post, blood seeping through his shirt, waiting for the darkness to take him. He's made peace with it until a barefoot child emerges from the shadows and asks if he wants to meet her mother. He should say no. He should send her away. But when her small hand reaches for his, something inside him, something he thought died years ago on a battlefield soaked in screams, stirs back to life. He doesn't know it yet, but this little girl is about to save him. Or destroy him. Maybe both. If you're ready for a story about broken people, second chances, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself but grows in silence, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The trading post smelled like tobacco, old leather, and the kind of failure that settles into wood over decades. Jonah Hale sat against the outer wall, his back pressed to sun-bleached planks, his right shoulder throbbing with an infection he could feel spreading through his veins like whiskey through water. The wound had started clean, a bullet graze from a skirmish 3 weeks back that should have healed by now. But infection didn't care about should. It cared about dirt, neglect, and the fact that Jonah had been riding hard with no supplies and less hope. He'd stopped here because his horse had stopped first. The animal knew before Jonah did that they weren't going any further today. Maybe not ever. The sun was setting over the Colorado frontier, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and deep purple. Beautiful in the way that endings often are. Jonah had seen enough sunsets to know that beauty didn't mean mercy. It just meant the day was done with you. He closed his eyes and let his head fall back against the wall. His rifle lay across his lap, though he doubted he had the strength to lift it if trouble came. His canteen was empty. His money was gone. His reasons for staying alive had run out somewhere around the Kansas border. He was 34 years old, and he was ready to stop. "You look tired, mister." The voice was small, clear, and entirely unexpected. Jonah's eyes snapped open. Standing about 6 feet away was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, barefoot and wearing a simple cotton dress that had been mended so many times it was hard to tell what color it had started as. Her hair was dark brown, tangled, and full of the kind of wild freedom that came from not having anyone tell her to brush it. Her face was dirty. Not neglected dirty, but outside all day dirty. The kind of dirt that meant she'd been climbing trees or digging in creek beds or doing whatever it was that children did when the world hadn't crushed them yet. She was staring at him with the kind of directness that children have before they learn to be polite. No fear, no hesitation, just curiosity. Jonah blinked at her, wondering if the fever had finally taken him and this was some kind of hallucination, but she didn't fade. She just stood there, waiting. His voice came out rough, barely more than a rasp. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." She tilted her head, studying him the way a bird might study a strange insect. "You're bleeding." He glanced down at his shoulder. The makeshift bandage he'd tied there days ago was soaked through, dark red turning to rust brown. He'd stopped noticing the blood. That probably wasn't a good sign. "It's nothing," he said, though they both knew he was lying. "Ma says lying makes your face do a thing. It's some..." The girl took a step closer. "Your face is doing the thing. Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the near certainty that he was dying." Jonah felt the corner of his mouth twitch, not quite a smile, but close enough that it surprised him. "Your ma sounds smart." "She is." The girl took another step. She was close enough now that Jonah could see her eyes were green, the color of new leaves in spring. "She's real good at fixing things, animals mostly, but people too sometimes." Jonah's hand tightened slightly on the rifle, not in threat but in instinct. "That's so." "Uh-huh." The girl crouched down in the dust, balancing easily on the balls of her feet. She was looking at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, like she could see straight through all the layers of dirt and blood and bad decisions to whatever was left underneath. "You got a name, mister?" "Jonah." He didn't know why he answered. He should have told her to go away, to get back to her mother, to leave strange bleeding men alone. But something about her made it impossible to lie. "Jonah Hale." "I'm Lark." She said it like it was a complete sentence, like her name was all the introduction she needed. You want to meet my ma? The question was so simple, so sincere, that for a moment Jonah couldn't process it. He stared at her, this barefoot child offering kindness to a stranger who probably looked like every mother's nightmare, armed, wounded, dangerous. I don't think that's a good idea, Lark. Why not? Because, he gestured vaguely at himself, at the blood and the rifle, and the general disaster of his existence. I'm not fit for company. Ma don't care about fit. She cares about hurt. Lark stood up, brushing dust off her dress in a way that only spread it around. And you're hurt, so you should come. Your ma know you're out here talking to strangers? I ain't supposed to. She said it without any shame, like breaking rules was just part of her day. But I saw you from the rise, and I thought you looked sad. Real sad. The kind of sad that means you might do something stupid if somebody don't stop you. Jonah felt something crack open in his chest. This child, this small, dirty, impossibly perceptive child, had seen him, really seen him. And instead of running, instead of getting her mother or the sheriff or anyone with sense, she'd walked right up and offered help. I'm not worth helping, little bird. That's stupid. Lark crossed her arms. Everybody's worth helping. That's what Ma says. She says giving up on people is easy, and easy things ain't usually right things. Your ma sounds like she's never met anyone truly past saving. She's met plenty. Lark's voice was matter-of-fact. She just don't believe in past saving. She believes in now saving. Jonah closed his eyes again. The fever was making his head swim, and this conversation felt increasingly surreal. But the girl's presence was oddly grounding. She was real. The dusty ground beneath him was real. The pain in his shoulder was definitely real. Where's home? He heard himself ask. About 2 miles west. Got a little house, some chickens, a garden. It ain't much, but it's good. Lark uncrossed her arms and pointed toward the darkening horizon. Ma will have supper on. She always makes extra, just in case. Just in case what? Just in case somebody needs it. Lark looked at him like this was obvious. You need it. Jonah opened his eyes and looked at this strange, fearless child who'd appeared out of nowhere with her bare feet and her honest eyes and her unshakable certainty that he deserved kindness. Every instinct he had, every hard-won lesson about survival and self-preservation told him to refuse, to send her home, to die here quietly without dragging anyone else into his mess. But there was something in Lark's face that reminded him of before the war, before the blood, before he'd learned that most people were capable of terrible things given the right circumstances. She looked at him like he was worth the trouble, like his life meant something beyond the sum of his mistakes. And God help him, he was too tired to argue with her. 2 miles? His voice was barely a whisper. Uh-huh. Can you ride? Jonah glanced at his horse, which was tied to a post nearby, head down, exhausted. Maybe. If the horse can. He can if you can. Lark walked over to the animal and stroked its nose with the easy confidence of someone who'd grown up around livestock. Hey there, big fella. You got a little more in you? The horse snorted softly, and Jonah could have sworn the damn animal perked up at the sound of her voice. See? Lark turned back to him, grinning. He says yes. Getting to his feet was an exercise in agony. Jonah's legs shook. His vision grayed at the edges, and for a moment he thought he might pass out right there in the dirt. But Lark was suddenly at his side, this tiny child trying to steady a grown man who outweighed her by 150 pounds. And the absurdity of it gave him something to focus on besides the pain. Easy, she said, her small hands surprisingly strong as they gripped his arm. One step at a time, Mr. Jonah. He made it to the horse, made it into the saddle, though the effort left him gasping and seeing stars. Lark untied the reins and handed them up to him. You just follow me, okay? I know the way, even in the dark. Jonah nodded, not trusting his voice. Lark started walking, and the horse followed without Jonah having to do anything. He held the saddle horn with both hands, focusing on staying upright, on breathing, on not falling off and humiliating himself in front of a child who decided he was worth saving. The landscape rolled by in waves of gathering darkness. The Colorado frontier was beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Vast stretches of nothing interrupted occasionally by something. Scrub brush, rocks, the skeletal remains of trees that had given up on life years ago. The sky above was enormous, stars beginning to prick through the purple black like holes in a curtain. Lark walked ahead of him, bare feet making no sound on the hard-packed earth. She didn't look back to check if he was following. She just trusted that he was. That kind of trust felt dangerous, and Jonah wanted to tell her so, wanted to explain that trust got you killed, that faith in strangers was how you ended up in a shallow grave somewhere. But he didn't say anything. He just followed. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Lark stopped and pointed. There. Jonah looked up and saw it, a small structure built low to the ground, barely distinguishable from the earth around it. It wasn't a traditional house. It looked like it had been dug into a hillside and built out from there. Walls made of adobe and sod, a roof covered in grass and wildflowers that had probably sprouted on their own. There was a small corral nearby with a few chickens roosting for the night, and what looked like a vegetable garden off to one side. Smoke rose from a chimney, thin and gray against the darkening sky. Lark turned to look at him, her face suddenly serious. Ma don't like surprises. I'm going to go tell her you're here, okay? You wait. Before Jonah could respond, she was running toward the house, her bare feet flying over the ground. He watched her disappear around the side of the structure, and for a moment he considered turning his horse around and riding back into the dark. This was a mistake. He was bringing trouble to these people. He was always trouble. But his body had other ideas. The moment Lark was out of sight, the last of his strength gave out. He slumped forward in the saddle, barely conscious, held in place only by sheer stubbornness and the fact that the horse had stopped moving. He heard voices, women's voices, one high and young, one lower and sharp with alarm. Then footsteps, quick and purposeful. Jesus Christ, Lark, what were you thinking? The voice was clear, controlled, and absolutely furious. Not at him, at Lark. Jonah tried to lift his head, tried to say something, but the world was tilting sideways and he couldn't remember how to make words work. Strong hands grabbed him, stronger than he expected. Someone was pulling him down from the horse, and he should have fought it, should have resisted, but he was falling anyway, and at least this way, someone was catching him. I got you. Don't fight me. The voice was right in his ear now, and it took him a moment to realize it was the woman, Lark's mother. She was holding most of his weight, and he could feel the tense strength in her arms, the controlled way she was lowering him to the ground instead of just letting him collapse. Lark, get water, clean water from the barrel, not the trough, and bring the medical kit from the shelf. Yes, Ma? Small footsteps running, the sound of a door opening and closing. Jonah's eyes fluttered open. The sky was purple-black above him, stars everywhere. And leaning over him was a woman's face, backlit by the last of the daylight, so he couldn't make out details. But he could see the set of her jaw, the tightness around her eyes, the way she was looking at him, not with kindness exactly, but with a kind of fierce assessment. Can you hear me? Her voice was steady. Yeah. The word came out like sandpaper. Good. You're burning up. That shoulder's infected. How long? Days, week? Don't know. Helpful. She shifted, and he felt her hands moving over his shoulder, checking the wound with quick, efficient touches that hurt like hell, but felt practiced, professional. This is bad. Should have been cleaned days ago. Didn't have... He gasped as her fingers hit a particularly tender spot. Didn't have supplies. Or sense, apparently. She sat back on her heels. I'm going to move you inside. You're going to hurt. Don't hit me. Despite everything, Jonah almost laughed. Wouldn't dream of it, ma'am. Good. She moved around behind him and got her arms under his shoulders. For a woman, for anyone, she was remarkably strong. She lifted him part way, enough that he could get his feet under him, and together they staggered toward the house. Each step was agony. Each breath felt like his last. But she didn't let him fall. Lark appeared in the doorway, arms full of supplies, eyes wide. Not the main house, the woman, Rowan, he assumed, said sharply. The granary. Help me get him there. They veered left toward a small outbuilding Jonah hadn't noticed before. Lark ran ahead and pushed the door open. Inside was dim and cool, smelling of dry wheat and old wood. There was a pile of burlap sacks in one corner, and Rowan aimed for that, lowering Jonah down with surprising gentleness. "This'll do for now," she said, more to herself than to him. Jonah's vision was fading in and out. He was aware of Rowan moving around him, of Lark's small voice asking questions, of hands on his shoulder again, cutting away his shirt, cleaning the wound with something that burned worse than the original bullet. He might have screamed. He wasn't sure. "Stay with me," Rowan's voice cut through the haze. Sharp, commanding. "You don't get to die in my granary. You understand? That's not happening tonight." He wanted to tell her that dying wasn't really up to him at this point, but the words wouldn't come. Everything was spinning, and the pain was everywhere. And the only thing anchoring him to consciousness was the pressure of her hands on his shoulder and the absolute certainty in her voice. "Lark, the whiskey." "But Ma, you said—" "I know what I said. Get it." Small footsteps, the sound of glass on wood, then liquid fire in his mouth, down his throat, and Rowan's voice again, closer now. "Swallow. All of it." He did. The whiskey hit his empty stomach like a punch, but it was something to focus on besides the feeling of her digging into his shoulder. "There." Her voice changed, satisfaction creeping in. "Got it. Piece of cloth that worked its way deep. No wonder it went septic." Jonah's eyes rolled back. The last thing he heard was Lark's small voice, worried and close. "Is he going to die, Ma?" And Rowan's response, flat and certain. "Not tonight, not if I can help it." Then the darkness took him, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, it felt almost gentle. When Jonah woke, the world was soft and gray. Dawn light filtered through cracks in the granary walls, painting everything in shades of silver. His shoulder was bandaged, properly bandaged, with clean cloth that smelled faintly of herbs. His fever had broken. He was alive. For a moment, he just lay there, staring at the rough wooden ceiling, trying to piece together how he'd ended up here. Then it came back in fragments. The trading post, the little girl with bare feet and honest eyes, the ride through the darkness, the woman's hands pulling infection from his wound. He sat up slowly, testing his body. Everything hurt, but it was a different kind of hurt. The sharp, desperate pain of infection had dulled to a general ache. His shoulder was stiff but bearable. He was weak as a newborn, but he was alive. The door to the granary stood open, morning light spilling through. Jonah could hear sounds from outside, chickens clucking, the low murmur of women's voices. He got to his feet, swaying slightly, and made his way to the doorway. The sight that greeted him was simple and strange. The earth-built house looked different in daylight. Not crude, but intentional. Everything about it spoke of careful survival, of making something lasting from nothing. The garden was larger than he'd realized, neat rows of vegetables stretching toward a small creek. The chicken coop was well made. The corral was sturdy. And standing near the house, talking in low tones, were Rowan and Lark. This was the first time Jonah got a clear look at Rowan. She was tall, taller than most women he'd known, and lean in the way of people who worked hard every day and rarely had enough to eat. Her hair was dark brown, pulled back in a practical braid. Her face was weathered, but not old, marked more by sun and wind than years. She might have been 30, might have been 40. Hard to tell when life didn't leave room for softness. She was wearing simple clothes, canvas pants, a worn shirt, boots that had been repaired multiple times, work clothes, survivor's clothes. And she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with convention and everything to do with strength. Lark spotted him first. "Ma, he's up!" Rowan's head turned sharply. Her eyes, light brown, almost gold in the morning sun, locked onto Jonah with an intensity that made him want to step back into the granary. But he held his ground. She crossed the distance between them in long, purposeful strides, stopping a few feet away. Close enough to talk. Far enough to run if needed. "How's the shoulder?" Her voice was the same as he remembered. Controlled, careful, giving nothing away. "Better. Thank you for—" "Don't." She held up a hand. "Don't thank me yet. You're not out of danger. That infection could come back if you're not careful." "I understand." "Do you?" She tilted her head, studying him the way Lark had the night before, but without any of the child's warmth. Because from where I'm standing, you don't look like a man who's been careful about much of anything. Jonah had no response to that. She was right. Rowan crossed her arms. Here's how this works. You stay in the granary, not the house. You don't come near the house unless I say so. You eat what we can spare, which won't be much. You rest until you can ride, and then you leave. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. And you don't talk to Lark unless I'm present. I don't know you. I don't know what you are or what you've done. And I won't risk my daughter on assumptions. The words stung, but Jonah understood them. More than that, he respected them. This woman had already taken a huge risk bringing him here. She didn't owe him trust. I wouldn't harm a child. The words came out harder than he intended. Whatever else I am, I wouldn't do that. Men say a lot of things. Rowan's expression didn't change. I care about what they do. So you'll stay away from her, understood? Understood. Good. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back. Your horse is in the corral. I gave him water and feed. Seemed like the least I could do since he carried you here. Thank you. Thank him. He's the one who did the work. She started walking toward the house, then called over her shoulder without looking back. Breakfast in an hour. Lark will bring it to you. Don't try to come to the house. Yes, ma'am. She disappeared inside, and Jonah was left standing there, weak and uncertain, in a place he didn't belong. Lark lingered near the garden, watching him with those knowing green eyes. When she caught him looking, she smiled, small but genuine. Then she followed her mother inside, and Jonah was alone with the chickens in the morning and the strange, disorienting feeling that for the first time in years, someone had chosen to let him live. He didn't know what to do with that, so he did what he always did when life confused him. He went back to the granary, sat down on the burlap sacks, and tried to figure out how to deserve the second chance he'd been given. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The chickens clucked and fussed. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out, harsh and lonely. And in the quiet of that morning, Jonah Hale, soldier, drifter, man who'd given up, began the slow, painful work of staying alive. The first 3 days passed in a haze of fever dreams and forced stillness. Jonah spent most of his time in the granary, drifting between sleep and something that wasn't quite waking, while his body fought the last remnants of infection. Lark brought him food twice a day, always at arm's length, always with Rowan watching from a distance like a hawk studying a snake. The meals were simple. Cornbread, beans, sometimes a piece of salt pork so small it barely counted as meat, but it was more than he deserved, and he ate every crumb. He tried to thank Rowan on the second day when she came to change his bandages. She worked in silence, her hands efficient and impersonal, treating his shoulder the way she might treat a wounded animal, with care but without attachment. Ma'am, I appreciate, save it. She didn't look up from her work. You can show appreciation by healing fast and leaving faster. After that, Jonah stopped trying to talk to her. On the fourth morning, he woke before dawn with clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. The fever was gone. His shoulder still ached, but the pain was manageable, almost ignorable. He sat up and realized with something close to surprise that he was hungry, actually hungry, not just empty. His body wanted to live again. He stood slowly, testing his balance. Steady enough. He walked to the granary door and looked out at the pre-dawn darkness. The house was dark. Everyone still sleeping. The chickens were quiet. The world was holding its breath before sunrise. Jonah stepped outside. The air was cool and clean, carrying the smell of sage and distant rain. He walked to the corral where his horse stood dozing and stroked the animal's neck. "We're alive, old man," he whispered. "Somehow we're still alive." The horse snorted softly, unimpressed. Movement caught Jonah's eye. He turned and saw Rowan emerge from the house carrying a bucket. She froze when she saw him, her whole body going tense. In the gray pre-dawn light, he could see her hand move instinctively toward her belt, where a knife hung in a leather sheath. "Just checking on the horse," Jonah said quickly, raising his hand slightly. Nothing else. Rowan stared at him for a long moment, then seemed to force herself to relax. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep." "Fever gone?" "Yes, ma'am." She nodded once, then walked past him toward the well without another word. Jonah watched her lower the bucket, heard the distant splash, saw her pull it back up with the kind of practiced strength that came from doing this every single day for years. She filled her bucket and started back toward the house, then paused. "Your shoulder needs checking. Come to the house after breakfast." It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. But it was the first time she'd allowed him near the main building, and that felt significant. "Yes, ma'am." She disappeared inside, and Jonah was left standing in the growing light, wondering what had changed. Breakfast came an hour later, brought by Lark. But this time, Rowan followed a few steps behind, watching. Lark handed him a plate, more food than usual, he noticed, and stepped back. "Ma says you can eat at the table if you want," Lark announced, her eyes bright with excitement. "Real table, not just sitting in the granary like a—" "Lark," Rowan's voice was sharp. "Like a guest," Lark finished quickly. "That's what I was going to say." Jonah looked at Rowan, surprised. She wouldn't meet his eyes, but her jaw was set in a way that told him this decision had cost her something. "I don't want to intrude," he said carefully. "You already are intruding." Rowan's tone was flat. "Might as well do it where I can see you." It wasn't gracious, but Jonah had learned not to expect gracious from her. He followed them to the house, Lark skipping ahead, Rowan walking with the measured pace of someone approaching something dangerous. Inside, the house was smaller than it looked from outside, but surprisingly warm. One main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. There was a fireplace built into the far wall, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with jars of preserved food and dried herbs. A doorway led to what Jonah assumed was a bedroom. Everything was clean, ordered, maintained with the kind of care that spoke of pride even in poverty. "Sit." Rowan pointed to one of the chairs. Jonah sat. Lark climbed into the other chair, swinging her legs under the table. Rowan remained standing, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, watching him eat like he might suddenly sprout claws. The food was better than what she'd been sending to the granary: eggs, actual bacon, bread that was still warm. Jonah ate slowly, aware of her scrutiny, trying not to look like a starving animal, even though that's exactly what he felt like. "Where are you from?" Lark asked suddenly. "Lark?" "It's all right." Jonah swallowed his mouthful of eggs. "Kentucky, originally, long time ago." "What brings you to Colorado?" "Lark, that's enough." "I'm just asking, Ma. You said we could talk to him if you were here." Rowan's jaw tightened, but she didn't contradict this. Jonah got the sense that Lark had worn her down through sheer persistence, the way water wears down stone. "I was looking for work," Jonah said, which was partially true. "Headed west like everyone else, I suppose." "You find any?" Lark tilted her head. "Not yet." "That's 'cause you got shot," Lark said matter-of-factly. "Hard to work when you're bleeding everywhere." "Lark!" Rowan pushed off the counter. "Outside, now. Go check the chickens." "I already checked them." "Check them again." Lark sighed dramatically, but slid off her chair. She paused at the door and looked back at Jonah. "I'm glad you didn't die, Mr. Jonah." Then she was gone, leaving Jonah alone with Rowan, and a silence that felt heavy as wet wool. Rowan moved to the table and sat down in the chair Lark had vacated. She was close enough now that Jonah could see the fine lines around her eyes, the small scar on her left cheek, the way her hands were rough and calloused from work. She was probably younger than he'd initially thought, maybe early 30s, but life had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with years. "I need to know what you are," she said quietly. "Ma'am? Are you running from the law? From debt? From violence?" Her eyes were steady on his. "Because if trouble is coming behind you, I need to know now. I've got a child to protect." Jonah set down his fork. "No law, no debt collectors, no one's looking for me." "Then why were you bleeding at a trading post in the middle of nowhere?" He considered lying, considered telling her some story about bandits or accidents or bad luck, but something in her face told him she'd know. And after what she'd done for him, she deserved better than lies. "I was in a skirmish. Settlers and cattlemen fighting over water rights about 30 miles east of here. I tried to mediate, and someone decided shooting was easier than talking." "You're a mediator?" She sounded skeptical. "Not professionally, but I've seen enough violence to know it doesn't solve much. Sometimes I try to stop it before it starts." He met her eyes. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. Rowan studied him for a long moment. You carrying anything besides that rifle? A pistol. Knife. That's all. Army? The question hit him like a physical blow. He must have flinched because Rowan's expression sharpened. That's a yes, she said. Long time ago. Different life. Army don't leave you. Her voice had gone cold. It's in how you stand, how you move, how you watch doorways. She leaned back in her chair. What were you? Cavalry? Infantry? Does it matter? It does to me. Jonah took a breath. Cavalry? 8th Regiment. I was discharged in 72. Discharged or deserted? Discharged. Honorably, if that means anything. It doesn't. Rowan stood abruptly. My husband died in an army camp. Did you know that? Jonah's stomach dropped. No, ma'am, I didn't. Fort Robinson, 1876. Her voice was hard as stone. Cheyenne breakout. They said it was a battle, but it wasn't. It was slaughter. Women, children, people who'd already surrendered. And my husband, she stopped, swallowed hard. He was trying to help them, trying to get them medical care. They shot him along with everyone else. The silence that followed was crushing. Jonah wanted to say something, anything, but what words existed for this? He'd heard stories about Fort Robinson. Everyone had. The kind of stories that made you ashamed to have ever worn a uniform. I'm sorry, he said finally, knowing it was inadequate. Sorry doesn't bring him back. Rowan's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Sorry doesn't explain why good men die trying to do right while cowards live to do it again. You're right. It doesn't. So you understand why having an army man in my home makes me want to burn everything down and start over somewhere he's never been. Jonah stood slowly, carefully. I understand. And I'll leave. Today, if you want. I'm strong enough to ride. Sit down. He blinked. Ma'am? I said sit down. Rowan pressed her palms flat on the table, leaning forward. You think I spent 4 days keeping you alive just to send you off to die somewhere else? You think that's what my daughter would want after she dragged you here? I don't want to cause you pain. Too late. You're already here. Pain's already happening. She straightened up. But Lark's attached to you now. Talks about you like you're some kind of wounded bird she's nursing back to health. And I won't break her heart by throwing you out before you're ready. I don't deserve... Stop. Rowan held up a hand. I don't care what you deserve. None of us get what we deserve. We get what we get, and we deal with it. She moved toward the door. You'll stay until you're fully healed, but you'll work. I'm not running a charity. I'll do whatever you need. Good, because the roof on the granary needs fixing. Fence lines got 3 posts rotted through, and the chicken coop door's been hanging crooked for 2 months. She paused at the doorway. You can start with the fence. Tools are in the shed out back. Then she was gone, leaving Jonah standing in her kitchen, trying to understand what had just happened. The work started that afternoon. Rowan showed him to a small shed behind the house where tools hung on the walls in careful organization. Shovels, hammers, saws, all maintained better than most people maintained their weapons. She handed him a post-hole digger and pointed toward the eastern fence line. 3 posts. You'll know which ones by the way they wobble. Dig new holes, set new posts, tamp the dirt tight. There's cedar in the woodpile you can use. Yes, ma'am. And Jonah? She looked at him directly for the first time since the conversation in the kitchen. You pass out or tear that shoulder open, you're on your own. I'm not nursing you through stupidity. Understood. She nodded and walked away, back toward the house where Lark was supposed to be doing her lessons but was actually watching from the window, her face pressed to the glass. Jonah carried the tools to the fence line. The posts were easy to spot, 3 weathered pieces of wood that had rotted at the base and now leaned at angles that would have been comical if they weren't actively failing at their job. He started with the first one, working it loose from the hard earth, then digging a new hole beside the old one. The work was hard. His shoulder protested every movement, sending sharp reminders that he wasn't fully healed. But there was something almost meditative about it, the rhythm of digging, the simple goal, the tangible progress. This was work he understood, work that didn't require him to make impossible choices or live with the consequences of violence. He was halfway through the second post when Lark appeared beside him, seemingly out of nowhere. "Ma says I can bring you water if I don't talk too much." Jonah straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Thank you kindly." She handed him a canteen and he drank deeply. The water was cold and clean, probably from the well. It tasted better than anything he'd had in months. "You're doing it right," Lark observed, watching him work. "Doing what right?" "The posts. Pa used to dig them the same way. Deep enough they won't wobble, but not so deep you waste daylight." Jonah felt something tighten in his chest. "Your pa taught you about fence posts?" "Taught me about everything." Lark sat down in the dirt, apparently settling in despite her mother's instructions about not talking too much. How to plant seeds in rows. How to tell when chickens are sick. How to read the sky for rain. She squinted up at the clouds. He was real smart about things. Sounds like he was. Ma says he was too good for the world. That's why the world took him back. Lark pulled up a handful of dry grass and let it fall through her fingers. "I don't remember him much. Just pieces." His voice was deep. He smelled like wood smoke. He used to let me ride on his shoulders. Jonah drove the post hole digger into the earth, not knowing what to say. "Do you got any kids, Mr. Jonah?" "No." "Were you married?" "Once, long time ago." "What happened?" "She decided she didn't want to be married to me anymore." He said it lightly, like it was a simple fact rather than something that had torn him apart. "Can't say I blamed her." "Why not?" "Because I wasn't a very good husband. I was gone too much. Saw too much. Came back different than when I left." Lark considered this. "The army." "Yeah, the army. Ma don't like the army." "I noticed." "But she don't seem to hate you." Lark tilted her head. "Not like she hates other army men who come through sometimes. Those ones she won't even give water to. Tells them to move along before she gets the rifle." So Jonah stopped digging. "Other army men come through here?" "Sometimes. Looking for deserters or trying to buy supplies or just passing through. Ma always sends them away." Lark stood up, brushing dirt off her dress. "But she let you stay, even after she found out. I heard you talking this morning. Your ma's got a kind heart under all that armor." "She's got a scared heart," Lark corrected. "That's different from kind. Kind is easy when you're not scared. She's kind anyway, which is harder." The wisdom in that statement, coming from a 7-year-old, stopped Jonah cold. He looked at this strange, perceptive child and wondered what kind of life had taught her to see so clearly. "You're pretty smart, little bird." "I know." She said it without arrogance, just fact. "Ma says I got Pa's brains and her stubbornness, says it's going to make my life hard." "Probably will. But interesting, too. Hard things usually are." Lark started walking back toward the house. "I gotta go. Ma will wonder, but I'll bring you more water later." She left him there in the afternoon sun, digging holes and thinking about scared hearts and the difference between kindness and survival. The work continued through the week: fence posts, roof repairs, the chicken coop door that Rowan had mentioned, which turned out to be more complicated than it sounded because the whole frame was slightly twisted. Jonah fixed what he could, rebuilt what he couldn't, and slowly the place began to show signs of improvement. Rowan watched him work, always from a distance, always with that same careful assessment. She never praised his efforts, but she also never criticized them. Once, when he'd finished replacing a section of the granary roof, he looked down and caught her nodding to herself, a small expression of satisfaction that disappeared the moment she realized he'd seen it. The meals moved from the granary to the house. Not every meal. Rowan wasn't ready for that much trust, but breakfast and dinner. Lunch he took by himself, working through the midday heat with the kind of determination that came from wanting to prove something. What exactly, he wasn't sure. Maybe that he could be useful. Maybe that he wasn't what she feared. Lark became his constant shadow when Rowan allowed it. She'd sit nearby while he worked, talking about everything and nothing. The names she'd given all the chickens, the time she saw a bear down by the creek, the constellations her father had taught her. Sometimes she'd help, handing him tools or holding boards steady. Sometimes she'd just watch, content in the silence. Rowan's wariness didn't disappear, but it shifted. She stopped watching him like he might suddenly turn violent, started watching him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Once, about 2 weeks into his stay, she actually spoke to him first. "You know carpentry." It wasn't a question. Jonah was working on reinforcing the corral fence. He didn't stop, didn't look up. "Learned it from my father. He was a builder." "Good builder?" "The best I knew." "You could have done that instead of the army." "Could have done a lot of things instead of the army." He drove a nail home with more force than necessary. "Youth makes you stupid. You think adventure and honor mean something. And now? Now I know better." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "The fence looks good. Sturdy." It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd given him. Jonah felt it settle in his chest like warmth. "Thank you, ma'am." She walked away without responding, but something had shifted. Some small wall had come down, and neither of them acknowledged it directly, but they both felt it. That night at dinner, Lark was full of excitement about a bird's nest she'd found. "Eggs, Ma, 3 of them, all blue and perfect. I didn't touch them, I just looked." "Good girl. Mama bird will come back if you don't disturb her. Can we check on them tomorrow? See if they hatched?" "We'll see." Jonah ate his stew quietly, listening to them talk. There was an ease between mother and daughter that spoke of deep love and deeper trust. They had their own language, their own rhythms. He was an outsider here, and he'd never be anything else. But watching them, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not belonging. He'd never belong anywhere again. But proximity to belonging. The warmth of being near something good and real, even if it wasn't his. After dinner, Rowan sent Lark to bed and started cleaning the dishes. Jonah stood to help, but she waved him off. "You worked all day. Sit." He sat, watched her move around the small kitchen with practiced efficiency. After a while, she spoke without turning around. "You planning to stay much longer?" The question hit him harder than it should have. "I can leave whenever you want me to." "That's not what I asked." Jonah chose his words carefully. "I'm healed enough to travel, and I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." Rowan turned, drying her hands on a cloth. "You've earned your keep, more than earned it. The place looks better than it has in years." "Just trying to pay my debt." "You don't owe me anything. I made a choice to help you. That was mine, not yours." She leaned against the counter. "But Lark's gotten attached, and I need to know if you're the kind of man who'll disappear one morning without a word, or if you'll have the decency to say goodbye." "I would never do that to her." "You say that now." "I mean it." Jonah met her eyes. "Whatever you think of me, I wouldn't hurt that child. Not by leaving silent, not any way." Rowan studied him for a long moment. "My husband used to say you could tell a man's character by what he did when no one was watching." "I've been watching you, Jonah." "When you thought I wasn't looking. When you thought it didn't matter. And I've seen you fix things that didn't benefit you. Gentle with the animals. Patient with Lark even when she's being tiresome. She's never tiresome." Spoken like someone who doesn't live with her constant questions. But there was warmth in Rowan's voice now. "Point is, I've been waiting for you to show me who you really are. Waiting for the mask to slip." "And?" "And either you're the best liar I've ever met, or you're actually decent under all that sadness you carry around." Jonah didn't know what to say to that. No one had called him decent in years. He wasn't sure he believed it himself. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he said finally. "Things that keep me awake at night. Being here, working with my hands, helping in small ways. It doesn't erase any of that. I'm not asking for erasure. I'm asking for honesty." Rowan crossed her arms. "Are you dangerous?" "Yes." She blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. "I know how to hurt people," Jonah continued. "How to kill them efficiently. I spent years learning that trade, and there's a part of me that will always know how." He looked down at his hands, scarred, calloused, capable of violence. "But I choose not to. Every day I choose not to. That's the best I can offer." Rowan was quiet for so long that Jonah thought he'd lost whatever fragile trust they'd been building. Then she nodded slowly. "All right." "All right?" "All right, you can stay. If you want to. Not in the granary. That's ridiculous at this point. There's a small room off the side of the house. Used to be storage. You can clean it out. Make it livable." She held up a hand before he could respond. "You'll keep working. Keep earning your place. And if I ever feel like you're a threat to my daughter, you're gone. Understood?" Understood. Good. She turned back to the dishes. Now get out of my kitchen. I've got work to do. Jonah stood, his heart doing something strange in his chest. Rowan? She paused but didn't turn around. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Don't thank me yet, she said quietly. Winter's coming. We'll see if you still want to be here when the snow's 10 feet deep and there's nothing to do but survive. He left her there in the kitchen, golden lamplight surrounding her like armor, and walked out into the cool night. The stars were brilliant overhead, sharp and clear in the thin mountain air. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, lonely and wild. Jonah looked back at the house, at the warm light spilling from the windows, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at this small pocket of survival carved out of nothing. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he thought about the future not as something to endure, but as something that might actually arrive. And in the morning, he'd start clearing out that storage room and building himself a place to stay. Not forever. He didn't dare think about forever, but for now, for winter, for as long as they'd let him remain. That was enough. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. The storage room took 3 days to convert into living space. Jonah cleared out years of accumulated tools, broken equipment, and things Rowan had saved thinking she might need them someday. He patched holes in the walls, replaced a cracked window pane, built a simple bed frame from scrap lumber. It wasn't much, barely 8 feet by 10, but it had a door that closed and a window that faced east toward the sunrise. It was more than he'd had in years. Lark helped him hang an old blanket as a curtain, standing on a chair and holding the fabric while he hammered nails into the wall frame. There, she said, stepping back to admire their work. Now it's a real room. You're not a guest anymore, Mr. Jonah. You're staying. For the winter, he corrected gently. We'll see what happens after that. Ma says people who say we'll see usually mean yes, but don't want to admit it yet. Jonah smiled despite himself. Your ma's pretty wise. I know. Lark jumped down from the chair. She's scared, though. Of you staying, of you leaving, of everything, really. That's natural. She's protecting you. She's protecting herself, too. Lark looked at him with those two old eyes. People hurt her real bad when Pa died. Not just the ones who killed him. The ones after. The ones who said she couldn't keep this place alone. Who tried to take it from her. Who said a woman with a child had no business out here. Jonah felt anger kindle in his chest. What happened? She fought. Showed them all her papers, the deed, everything Pa made sure was in her name too. Threatened to shoot anyone who tried to force her off. Lark's voice was matter-of-fact, but her hands twisted together nervously. Some men don't like it when women fight back. They tried to make her life hard, refused to trade with her, spread stories. One even tried to burn the chicken coop. Did she shoot him? Shot near him. Close enough he understood. Lark smiled a little. After that, most folks left her alone. Figured she was crazy enough to be dangerous. She's not crazy. No, she's just done losing things she loves. The weight of that statement settled over Jonah like snow. He understood it completely. That's what happened when life took everything. You stopped letting anything get close enough to take. October bled into November, and the work continued. Jonah repaired everything that needed fixing and invented projects for things that didn't. He built a better door for the root cellar, reinforced the well cover, constructed a windbreak on the north side of the house to help with the coming winter storms. Rowan stopped questioning his presence and started planning around it, mentioning things that needed doing as if assuming he'd be there to do them. The meals became communal without discussion. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the table, the three of them falling into a rhythm that felt almost like family. Almost, but not quite. There was still careful distance in how Rowan spoke to him, still walls she wouldn't let down. But there were moments, small cracks in her armor that let light through, like the evening she laughed at something Lark said, a real laugh that transformed her whole face and caught Jonah staring. Their eyes met across the table, and for just a second something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or possibility. Then she looked away, the walls slamming back into place. Or the morning he found her struggling to move a heavy storage barrel, and he helped without asking permission. She didn't thank him, but later he found an extra piece of bacon on his dinner plate. Or the night Lark had a fever and Rowan sat up with her until dawn, And Jonah sat up too, keeping the fire going and making tea and being present in a way that said you don't have to carry everything alone. These moments accumulated like snow on a roof, each one adding weight to something neither of them wanted to name. The confrontation came on a cold November evening, when the sky was heavy with the promise of the season's first real snow. They'd just finished dinner and Lark was already asleep, exhausted from a day of chasing chickens and building elaborate stick forts near the creek. Jonah was helping Rowan clean up when she suddenly stopped, her hands gripping the edge of the wash basin. "I need to know something," she said, her voice tight. "All right. When you were in the army, when you were doing whatever it is you did," she turned to face him, "did you ever hurt anyone who didn't deserve it?" The question was a knife, sharp and precise. Jonah felt it slide between his ribs and lodge somewhere near his heart. "Yes," he said quietly. Rowan's face went pale. "Did you kill them?" "Some of them, not all, but yes." "Women? Children?" "No, never that. I swear to you, never that." Jonah's hands were shaking. "But I stood by while others did. I took orders I knew were wrong. I participated in actions that destroyed families, burned homes, scattered people who'd done nothing except exist in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Which people?" Her voice was barely a whisper now. Jonah closed his eyes. "Cheyenne, Arapaho, Lakota. Settlers who'd sided with them. Anyone the army decided was inconvenient." "You were at Sand Creek." It wasn't a question. Jonah's eyes snapped open. "No, I was never at Sand Creek. That was 64 before my time. But I was at places like it, smaller massacres that didn't make the newspapers, quiet violence that the government preferred to keep quiet." Rowan's hands had gone to her throat, like she was trying to hold something in. "My husband died trying to stop that violence. He was a medic, assigned to Fort Robinson. When the Cheyenne broke out, when they tried to escape rather than die of starvation and disease in that hellhole, he tried to help them. He gave them medicine, blankets, told them where the patrols were." Her voice broke. "They caught him, court-martialed him for treason, shot him in front of everyone as a lesson." "Rowan, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't you dare say you're sorry again. Sorry is worthless. Sorry doesn't change what happened. Sorry doesn't bring back good men or undo what monsters did." "You're right, it doesn't." "Were you there? At Fort Robinson during the outbreak?" "No, I was discharged by then, but I knew men who were. I heard the stories." Jonah's voice was raw. "And I knew men like your husband, good men who tried to do the right thing in a system designed to crush anything right. Most of them didn't survive either." "But you did." Rowan's eyes were blazing now, tears streaming down her face. "Men like you, who followed orders, who did the violence, you survived. While men like him, who tried to stop it, who tried to help, they died." "I know." "That's not fair." "No, it's not." "Then why?" She was shouting now, all the grief and rage she'd been holding for years pouring out like blood from a wound. "Why do people like you get to live? Get to come here, to my home, to eat at my table, to smile at my daughter? Why do you get second chances when he got a bullet?" Jonah had no answer. There was no answer. The universe didn't deal in fair. It dealt in random cruelty and inexplicable survival, and trying to find meaning in who lived and who died was like trying to hold water in your bare hands. "I don't know," he said finally. "I've asked myself that question every day since I left the army. Why I'm alive when better men are dead. Why I get to keep breathing when I don't deserve it." "You don't deserve it." Rowan's voice was vicious now, every word designed to wound. "You don't deserve my kindness, my daughter's affection, a warm place to sleep. You deserve to die alone in the dirt like you almost did." "You're right." "Then why are you still here?" She was screaming now, her whole body shaking. "Why did you let Lark bring you here? Why didn't you just die and save us all the trouble of caring about you?" "Because she asked me not to." Jonah's own voice rose to match hers. "Because a 7-year-old child looked at me like I was worth saving, and I was too weak to tell her no. Because for one moment, someone saw me as human instead of a mistake, and I wanted that so badly I followed her home like a stray dog." The silence that followed was deafening. They stood facing each other across the small kitchen, both breathing hard, both stripped raw. Rowan wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When she spoke again, her voice was cold and final. "I want you gone." Jonah nodded. "I'll leave first thing in the morning." "No, now, tonight. I want you out of my house." "Rowan, it's almost dark, and there's a storm coming." "I don't care." She moved to the door and opened it. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of coming snow. "Get your things and go. I'll tell Lark you had to leave. She'll understand eventually." "She won't, and it'll hurt her." "Then that's my burden to carry, not yours." Rowan's face was like stone. "You've done enough damage to enough people. You won't do it to her." Jonah wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that leaving like this, without explanation, would do exactly the damage she was trying to prevent. But he had no right. She'd given him shelter when he was dying, and he'd repaid her by being exactly what she feared most, a reminder of everything she'd lost. He walked to his small room and gathered his few belongings. His rifle, his pack, his coat. The space he'd worked so hard to make livable looked suddenly pathetic in the lamplight. He'd been stupid to think he could stay. Stupid to think he could be part of something good. When he emerged, Rowan was still standing by the door, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She wouldn't look at him. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything you did, for giving me a chance I didn't deserve." She said nothing. Jonah walked out into the night. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and the wind was picking up, carrying ice crystals that stung like tiny knives. His horse was in the corral, and he moved through the darkness to saddle the animal. His shoulder ached in the cold, a reminder that he wasn't fully healed, that riding into a storm was probably going to kill him. But dying alone in a blizzard seemed appropriate somehow. Poetic justice for a man who'd spent his life dealing death. He'd just finished tightening the cinch when he heard the door to the house open again. He turned, hoping irrationally that Rowan had changed her mind. But it was Lark who came running out, barefoot and in her nightgown, her face panicked. "Mr. Jonah, you can't go. There's a storm coming." "I know, little bird, but your ma wants me to leave and I have to respect that." "But you'll die out there." Lark grabbed his arm, her small hands surprisingly strong. "Please don't go, please. I'll talk to Ma. I'll make her understand. Lark, get back inside." Rowan's voice cut through the wind. "No, not until he promises to stay." Lark looked up at Jonah with tears streaming down her face. "You promised you wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. You promised." "I'm saying goodbye now, aren't I?" Jonah knelt down to her level. "Listen to me. Your ma's right. I'm not good for you. I'm not good for anyone. And the best thing I can do is leave before I hurt you worse." "You're not hurting me. You're helping. You fixed everything. You made Ma smile again." "Lark, I mean it. Inside right now." Rowan was coming toward them now, moving fast. But Lark wasn't listening. She wrapped her arms around Jonah's neck and held on tight. "Don't go. Please don't go. I need you here. We need you here." Jonah gently untangled her arms and stood up. "You don't need me. You've got your ma, and she's the strongest person I've ever met. She'll take care of you better than I ever could." He turned to his horse before he could see the hurt in Lark's eyes, before he could change his mind. He swung up into the saddle, and the animal shifted nervously under him, sensing the storm. "Jonah." Rowan's voice stopped him. She was standing a few feet away, Lark pressed against her side, both of them looking up at him. "I meant what I said. You need to leave." "I know. But don't die out there. That's not—" She stopped, struggling with something. "Just find shelter, survive the storm, then keep going." It was the closest thing to care she could offer, and Jonah understood what it cost her. "I will. Thank you." He turned his horse toward the darkness and urged it forward. Behind him, he could hear Lark crying and Rowan's low voice trying to comfort her. The sound followed him out into the empty land like a ghost. The storm hit within an hour. What had started as light snow became a wall of white, wind-driven ice that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Jonah pulled his coat tighter and let the horse pick its way forward, trusting the animal's instincts more than his own rapidly failing judgment. He should have felt angry, should have felt betrayed or hurt, or something other than this hollow acceptance. But he understood Rowan's rage. It was justified. He was a living reminder of a system that had destroyed her life, and no amount of fence mending or kindness to her daughter could change that. The temperature continued to drop. Jonah's hands were numb inside his gloves, his face raw from the wind. He needed to find shelter soon or he really would die out here. He looked around for anything, a rock outcropping, a grove of trees, an abandoned structure, but the storm had turned the world into a featureless white void. Then he heard it. Faint, almost lost in the wind, but unmistakable. A child's voice calling for help. Jonah pulled hard on the reins, bringing his horse to a stop. He listened, straining against the roar of the storm. There it was again. "Help! Somebody help me!" It was Lark. Terror shot through Jonah's veins like lightning. He wheeled his horse around, following the sound, pushing the animal faster than was safe in these conditions. What was she doing out here? Had she followed him? Had she gotten lost? "Lark, where are you?" "Here, I'm here." Her voice was close, somewhere to his left. Jonah dismounted and stumbled through knee-deep snow, following the sound. His boot hit something soft, and he looked down to see a small form huddled against a boulder, barely visible beneath the accumulating snow. "Lark!" He dropped to his knees beside her. She was shaking violently, her nightgown soaked through, her lips blue. "What are you doing out here?" "I followed you," she stammered through chattering teeth. "Wanted to make you come back. Got lost." Jonah felt rage and fear war inside him. She could have died. She was dying right now if he didn't get her warm. He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her tiny body, then scooped her up in his arms. She was so light it terrified him, and so cold she felt like stone. "Hold on, little bird. I've got you." He carried her to his horse and managed to get into the saddle with her cradled against his chest. The animal was already turning, heading back the way they'd come with the sure instinct of a creature that knew where shelter was. Jonah held Lark as close as he could, trying to share what little warmth his body had left. She was crying now, quiet sobs that shook her whole frame. I'm sorry, Mr. Jonah. I didn't mean to." "Shh. Don't talk. Just hold on." The ride back was a nightmare. Jonah wasn't sure they were even going in the right direction until he saw the faint glow of lamplight through the storm. The house. They'd made it. He half fell from the saddle, still clutching Lark, and staggered toward the door. Before he could knock, it flew open. Rowan stood there, face white with panic, hair wild from where she'd been running her hands through it. "I can't find her," Rowan said, her voice breaking. "I've looked everywhere. She's gone. She went after you." Then she saw what Jonah was carrying, and the world seemed to stop. "No." The word was barely a whisper. "No, no, no." Jonah pushed past her into the house and laid Lark down near the fireplace. "She's alive, but she's hypothermic. We need to get her warm. Now." Rowan was already moving, stripping off Lark's wet clothes, wrapping her in dry blankets, stoking the fire higher. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip anything, but she worked with desperate efficiency. "Lark, baby, can you hear me?" Rowan's voice was raw. Ma?" Lark's eyes fluttered open. "I'm sorry, so sorry. Don't you apologize. Just stay awake, okay? Stay with me." Jonah boiled water for tea, found more blankets, did everything he could think of while Rowan held her daughter and willed warmth back into her small body. The minutes stretched into hours. Gradually, painfully, Lark's shivering lessened. Her color improved, her breathing steadied. She fell asleep sometime past midnight, exhausted but alive. Rowan sat on the floor beside her, one hand on Lark's chest to feel it rise and fall, tears streaming silently down her face. Jonah stood across the room, soaked through from the storm, shaking from cold and adrenaline and the horrible knowledge that Lark had almost died because of him. Because Rowan had sent him away and Lark had tried to bring him back, and the storm had nearly killed them both. "I'm sorry." His voice was rough as gravel. "I should never have. You saved her." Rowan looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "If you hadn't hurt her, if you hadn't gone back, if I hadn't been here in the first place, she wouldn't have been out there. If you hadn't been here, she'd be dead right now." Rowan stood up slowly, her legs unsteady. "You could have kept riding, could have saved yourself and left her to the storm. I would never. I know." She crossed the room to stand in front of him. "I know that now. I knew it before, but I was too angry to admit it, too scared of what it meant if you were actually good. I'm not good, Rowan. Everything you said earlier was true. No, you were a soldier who followed orders you regret. You did things you can't take back. But you're also the man who heard my daughter crying in a blizzard and rode straight back into hell to find her. Rowan's voice broke. You risked your life for her. At the cost of your own safety, your own survival, you chose her. Jonah didn't know what to say. The truth was, there hadn't been a choice. The moment he'd heard Lark's voice, everything else had ceased to matter. She's everything, he said simply. How could I not? Rowan made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Then she did something that shocked them both. She reached out and pulled Jonah into an embrace, her arms wrapping tight around him, her face pressed against his chest. He stood frozen for a moment, not sure what to do. Then slowly, carefully, he put his arms around her and held on. They stood like that for a long time, two broken people holding each other up while the storm raged outside and a child slept peacefully by the fire, alive because someone had chosen to turn back. When Rowan finally pulled away, her face was wet with tears, but something had changed in her eyes. The walls were still there, but they had cracks now, real cracks that let light through. You're staying? She said. Not a question, a statement. If you'll have me, I'll have you. She looked over at Lark. We both will, for as long as you want to be here. Jonah felt something break open in his chest. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of forgiveness. I want to be here, he said quietly, for as long as you'll let me. Rowan nodded. Then she turned and went back to sit beside her daughter, keeping watch through what remained of the night. Jonah changed into dry clothes and built up the fire, then settled into a chair across from them. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside there was warmth and safety, and the fragile beginning of something none of them knew how to name yet. Sometime before dawn, Jonah's eyes grew heavy. The last thing he saw before sleep took him was Rowan looking at him across the firelight, her expression soft and unguarded. And in that moment he understood that whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm could rage all it wanted. They had shelter now. They had each other. And sometimes that was enough. The fever came back 3 days after the storm. Jonah woke in his small room to find the world spinning, his body burning from the inside out. The ride through the blizzard, the hours spent soaked and frozen, the desperate search for Lark, it had all taken a toll his weakened body couldn't bear. The shoulder infection that had nearly killed him the first time roared back to life with a vengeance, spreading through his system like wildfire. He tried to get up, tried to make it to the door, but his legs gave out and he collapsed halfway across the room. That's where Rowan found him an hour later when she came to check why he hadn't appeared for breakfast. No. Her voice was sharp with fear. Not again. You don't get to do this again. She got her arms under his shoulders and dragged him back to the bed with strength born of desperation. Her hands moved to his forehead, and he heard her curse softly at the heat radiating from his skin. Lark, she called out, bring the medical kit. And fresh water. Hurry! Jonah tried to speak, tried to tell her he was fine, but the words came out as nonsense. The room was tilting sideways, and Rowan's face kept blurring in and out of focus. Stay with me, she commanded, her hands already working to cut away his shirt. You hear me, Jonah Hale? You saved my daughter. You don't get to die 3 days later. That's not how this works. He wanted to tell her that death didn't care about fairness or timing, but the darkness was pulling at him, and it was easier to let go than to fight. Rowan's palm cracked across his cheek, sharp enough to bring him back. No. Eyes open. Stay here. Lark appeared in the doorway, her own face still pale from her ordeal, arms full of supplies. She took one look at Jonah and her eyes went wide. Ma, is he... He's going to be fine. Rowan's voice was steel. But I need your help. Can you be brave for me? Lark nodded, her jaw set in a way that made her look years older. What followed was a blur of pain and fever dreams. Jonah was dimly aware of Rowan cleaning the wound again, draining infection, packing it with herbs that burned like acid. He heard himself scream and felt strong hands holding him down. Heard Lark's small voice reading aloud from somewhere nearby, trying to distract him or herself, or maybe both of them. Time lost meaning. Sometimes it was day, sunlight streaming through the window. Sometimes night, lamplight casting shadows on the walls. Sometimes Rowan was there, changing bandages, forcing water and medicine down his throat. Sometimes it was Lark, her small hand in his, talking about chickens and birds and anything except the fact that he was dying. Once, deep in the fever, he thought he saw his ex-wife standing in the corner, shaking her head sadly. Another time, his father appeared, disappointed as always. And once, just once, he saw the faces of people he'd harmed in the war, men and women whose names he'd never known, whose lives he'd helped destroy. They stood in a silent circle around his bed, not accusing, just watching, waiting to see if he'd join them. But every time the darkness tried to claim him, Rowan's voice cut through like a blade. No, not yet. Stay! And somehow, impossibly, he did. On the fourth day, the fever broke. Jonah opened his eyes to find weak winter sunlight filtering through the window. His body felt like it had been trampled by horses, but his mind was clear. The room was real. The pain was manageable. He was alive. Rowan sat in a chair beside the bed, her head tilted back against the wall, eyes closed. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair coming loose from its braid, clothes rumpled from days of constant care. But she was there. She'd stayed. "Rowan," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Her eyes snapped open immediately, and she leaned forward. "You're awake. Truly awake?" "Yeah." He tried to sit up and immediately thought better of it. "How long?" 4 days. 4 days of fever and infection, and you trying your damnedest to die on me." She stood and poured water from a pitcher, then helped him drink. Her hands were gentle, but her voice was rough. "Do you have any idea how stubborn you are? How many times I thought we'd lost you?" "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. Just don't do it again." She set the cup down and pressed the back of her hand to his forehead. "Fever's gone. That's good. The wound's healing, but it's going to scar worse than before." "I've got plenty of scars. One more won't matter." "It matters to me." Rowan sat back down, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked truly vulnerable. "You saved my daughter's life. If you died because of it, I don't know how I'd—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I need you to understand something, Jonah. When I sent you away, when I said all those terrible things, I meant them. Every word was true. You were part of a system that killed my husband." "I know. But that night, when you brought Lark back, when you could have saved yourself but chose her instead," Rowan's voice broke. "You showed me who you are now, not who you were then, and I realized I was punishing you for sins that weren't entirely yours. I was angry at the whole damned world, and you were convenient. You had every right to be angry. Maybe. But I didn't have the right to send you to your death." She looked at him directly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "These past 4 days, watching you fight to stay alive, I kept thinking about what you said, about choosing not to be violent every day, about trying to be better than what the war made you. I'm trying, that's all I can do." "It's enough." Rowan reached out and took his hand, her calloused palm warm against his. "More than enough. You're a good man, Jonah. Maybe you weren't always. Maybe you did things you can't forgive yourself for. But you're good now, and that's what matters to me." Jonah felt something crack in his chest, something that had been frozen for years. He turned his head away, blinking hard against the sudden burning in his eyes. "Hey," Rowan's grip tightened. "Look at me." He did, and what he saw in her face made his breath catch. There was care there, real care, not obligation or pity, but genuine concern for his well-being. It was the first time in longer than he could remember that someone had looked at him that way. "You're staying," she said firmly, "not just for the winter, not until you heal. You're staying as long as you want to be here. This is your home now, if you'll have it." "Rowan, I can't." "Yes, you can. We need you here. The place needs you. Lark needs you." She paused, then added quietly, "I need you." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said. Jonah searched her face, looking for doubt or uncertainty, but found only fierce determination. "I don't deserve this," he said finally. "None of us deserve what we get. We just decide what to do with it. Rowan stood, brushing off her pants in a gesture that was almost self-conscious. Now rest. You need to regain your strength. Lark's been worried sick, and she'll want to see you when you're up to it. Where is she? Outside, checking on the chickens for the 100th time today. She's been staying close in case you woke up. Rowan moved toward the door, then turned back. Thank you, Jonah, for coming back for her, for choosing her life over your own. I know I said it before, but I need you to really hear it. Thank you. Then she was gone, leaving Jonah alone with the winter sunlight and a feeling in his chest he barely recognized as hope. Recovery was slow and frustrating. Jonah's body had been pushed past its limits twice now, and it demanded payment. For days he could barely move without exhaustion overwhelming him. Simple tasks like walking to the table for meals left him winded and shaking, but Rowan was patient in a way he hadn't expected. She brought him food, changed his bandages, sat with him when the pain got bad and didn't say anything, just stayed. Her presence became a constant, steady thing, not smothering but anchoring. Lark visited every day, bringing stories and treasures, a smooth rock from the creek, a feather from a hawk, drawings she'd made of the three of them standing in front of the house. She'd talk for hours if Rowan let her, filling the small room with her bright chatter, and Jonah found himself looking forward to her visits more than anything else. One afternoon, about a week into his recovery, Lark climbed onto the bed beside him and got very serious. Mr. Jonah, I need to say something. All right. It's my fault you got sick again, because I followed you into the storm, because you had to save me. Her lip trembled. Ma says it's not, but I know it is. Jonah shifted so he could look at her properly. Lark, listen to me. What happened in that storm wasn't your fault. You're a child, you were scared, and you made a decision based on feelings, which is what children do. But you almost died. I almost died the first time I showed up here before you'd done anything at all. I was already broken, little bird. You didn't break me. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You tried to save me, just like I tried to save you. Sometimes saving people is messy and dangerous, but it's still worth doing. You really think so? I know so. You and your ma saved my life multiple times now, and I'd ride into 1,000 storms to keep you safe. That's not a burden. That's a gift. Lark threw her arms around his neck, careful of his shoulder. I'm glad you stayed. Me too, little bird. Me too. December arrived with bitter cold and snow that piled in drifts against the house. Jonah grew stronger day by day until he could finally move around without feeling like he'd collapse. The first time he made it outside on his own, he stood in the doorway and just breathed the cold air, grateful to be alive. Rowan found him there, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the white landscape. Thinking about leaving? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Thinking about staying, he corrected. If the offer's still open. It's open. Then I'm staying. He glanced at her. But I need to pull my weight. I can't just be a burden here. You've never been a burden. Rowan leaned against the doorframe beside him. But if you're looking for work, the woodpile's getting low. We'll need more cut before the deep winter hits, and the chicken coop could use better insulation. I can do that. I know you can. She was quiet for a moment, then added, I've been thinking about what happens after winter, about the future. Jonah's chest tightened. And I think we should plant more in the spring, expand the garden, maybe get some goats. This place could support more if we worked it right. She turned to look at him. With 2 adults working instead of just me, we could actually thrive instead of just surviving. You want me to stay past winter. I want you to stay, period. Rowan's voice was firm. I want to build something here, Jonah, not just for me and Lark, but with you, as partners, as family. The word hit him like a physical blow, family. He hadn't had family in so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere, to someone. I'd like that, he said, his voice rough. More than I can say. Rowan smiled, a real smile that transformed her whole face. Good. Then it settled. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Jonah worked on the woodpile when his strength allowed, cutting and splitting logs with methodical determination. Rowan worked on preserving what food they had, planning for the long winter ahead. Lark helped both of them, running between tasks with endless energy. In the evenings, they gathered around the fire. Sometimes Rowan would read aloud from one of her few books, battered volumes she'd treasured for years. Sometimes Lark would tell stories, wild tales about talking animals and magical forests. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, each doing their own work, content in each other's presence. One night, about 3 weeks after Jonah's fever had broken, Rowan pulled out a small wooden box from a shelf. She opened it carefully, reverently, and removed something wrapped in cloth. "I want to show you something," she said quietly. Lark looked up from her drawing, curious. Jonah set aside the harness he'd been mending. Rowan unwrapped the cloth to reveal a pocket watch, old and silver, tarnished, but still beautiful. She held it like it was the most precious thing in the world. "This was my husband's," she said. "His father gave it to him. It's the only thing I have left of him besides memories." She opened the watch, and inside the cover was a small photograph, a young man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, holding a baby. "That's him with Lark, about 3 months before he died." Rowan's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. "His name was Thomas. He was good and brave and stupid enough to think he could change things from inside the system." Jonah looked at the photograph and felt the weight of the man's absence. "He looks like someone worth knowing." He was. Rowan closed the watch carefully. "I've held on to this like a talisman. Like as long as I had it, part of him was still here. But I've realized something these past few weeks." She turned to Jonah, her eyes clear and certain. "He's not coming back. No amount of holding on to the past will change that. And I think—" She took a breath. "I think he'd want me to keep living. Really living, not just surviving. He'd want Lark to have a full life, with people who care about her. He'd want me to be happy." "You don't need my permission to be happy, Rowan." "I know, but I need to give myself permission. And I need you to understand what this means." She held out the watch. "I'm giving this to you." Jonah's eyes widened. "I can't—" "Yes, you can. Thomas died trying to help people who needed it. You saved our daughter. You've helped us rebuild. You've become part of this family." Rowan's voice was thick with emotion. "This watch represents the best parts of who he was. And I think you embody those same parts. Compassion, courage, the willingness to do what's right even when it's hard. Rowan, please let me give this to you, not as a replacement for him, but as a symbol of trust, of faith in who you are now." She pressed the watch into his hand. "You've earned this. You've earned a place here." Jonah stared down at the watch, feeling the weight of it in his palm. This wasn't just a gift. It was an acceptance, a forgiveness he'd never dared hope for. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay. Say you'll help me raise Lark. Say you'll build something good here with us." Rowan's eyes were bright. "Say you'll let yourself be happy." Jonah looked from the watch to Rowan to Lark, who was watching them both with wide eyes. This family, this broken, patched-together, miraculous family, wanted him. Not despite his past, but because of who he'd chosen to become. "I'll stay," he said, his voice breaking. "For as long as you'll have me, I'll stay." Lark let out a whoop of joy and launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Rowan laughed, a sound of pure relief, and wrapped her arms around both of them. They stood like that for a long time. 3 people who'd all lost everything finding something new in each other. Outside, the wind howled and snow fell, but inside there was warmth and light, and the beginning of something that felt like healing. The winter deepened, and with it came challenges that tested them all. There were days when the cold was so bitter that just keeping the fire going was a full-time job. Days when food ran low and they rationed carefully, making every scrap count. Days when the isolation pressed down on them and tempers frayed, but they faced it together. When Jonah's shoulder ached in the cold, Rowan made poultices that eased the pain. When Rowan's grief for Thomas rose up unexpectedly, Jonah sat with her and let her talk or cry or rage without trying to fix it. When Lark got scared during particularly bad storms, both adults held her and told her stories until she fell asleep. They learned each other's rhythms. Jonah discovered that Rowan was sharpest in the mornings, that she liked her coffee strong enough to dissolve iron. Rowan learned that Jonah worked best in silence, that he needed time alone sometimes to wrestle with his demons. Lark figured out how to navigate both their moods, becoming a bridge between them when words failed. One evening in late January, after Lark had gone to bed, Jonah and Rowan sat by the fire in companionable silence. Rowan was mending clothes and Jonah was carving a small wooden horse for Lark's birthday. "Can I ask you something?" Rowan said suddenly. "Always." "What made you say yes? That first night when Lark asked you to come with her. You could have sent her away, should have probably. What made you follow her?" Jonah considered the question, turning the half-finished horse over in his hands. "Honestly, I was ready to die. I'd made peace with it. But then she looked at me like I mattered, like my life had value. And I'd been treated like I was worthless for so long that the simple act of someone seeing me as human—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "I followed her because for the first time in years someone asked me to live instead of telling me I should die." Rowan set down her mending. "I'm glad she asked. I'm glad you said yes. Even after everything? After I brought all my baggage to your door?" "Especially after everything." Rowan moved from her chair to sit beside him on the floor, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You came here broken, and instead of letting that brokenness poison you, you chose to heal. You chose to help. You chose us, every single day, even when I gave you every reason to leave." "You're not an easy woman to leave, Rowan." She laughed softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire. Then Rowan did something that surprised them both. She reached over and took Jonah's hand, threading her fingers through his. "This okay?" she asked quietly. Jonah looked down at their joined hands, her fingers calloused from years of hard work, his scarred from violence and survival. Two damaged people holding on to each other in the darkness. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is more than okay." They stayed like that until the fire burned low, two people who'd survived the worst life could throw at them, finding comfort in each other's presence. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that this felt like more than friendship, more than partnership, that somewhere along the way, between the arguments and the healing and the shared struggles, something deeper had taken root. But words weren't necessary. The hand-holding said everything they needed to say. February arrived with a thaw, brief but welcome. The snow melted enough that they could check the fences, assess any winter damage, plan for the spring to come. Jonah and Rowan worked side by side, repairing what needed fixing, discussing what they'd plant, where they'd expand. Lark followed them everywhere, chattering about the birds returning, the ice on the creek breaking up, the first shoots of green she'd spotted in the garden. "It's coming back to life," she announced one morning. "Everything was dead and now it's alive again." Jonah caught Rowan's eye over Lark's head and they shared a smile. The child had no idea how right she was. Everything was coming back to life. The land, the animals, and the three people who'd chosen to stay alive together. That night, after Lark was asleep, Rowan came to Jonah's room and knocked softly on the doorframe. "You awake?" "Yeah, come in." She entered holding something wrapped in cloth. "I made you something, for staying, for choosing us." She handed him the bundle, and he unwrapped it to find a thick wool scarf, hand-knitted in shades of gray and brown. "I've been working on it at night, after Lark goes to sleep." Rowan looked almost shy. "I know it's not much, but it's perfect." Jonah ran his fingers over the careful stitches, each one representing hours of work. "Thank you." "There's something else." Rowan sat on the edge of his bed, her hands twisting together nervously. "I've been thinking about what comes next. After winter, after spring, after all of this. And I don't want you to leave, ever." She looked up at him, her eyes vulnerable in a way he'd rarely seen. "I know it's selfish. I know you might want to move on eventually, find your own place, live your own life. But I need you to know that this is your home for as long as you want it, not as a worker or a temporary guest, but as family, as someone who belongs here." Jonah felt his throat tighten. "Rowan, I'm not going anywhere. This is the first place I've belonged in over a decade. You and Lark, you're my family now, the only family I've got." "Good." She reached out and took his hand again, that gesture that had become natural between them. because I can't imagine doing this without you anymore. Any of it. They sat together in the quiet of his small room, holding hands like teenagers, neither of them ready to name what was growing between them, but both of them feeling it bloom. Outside, the winter wind whispered promises of spring, and inside, three people who'd survived the storm were learning, slowly and carefully, how to build something worth staying for. Spring came late to the Colorado frontier that year, but when it finally arrived, it came with a vengeance. The snow melted in rushing torrents, filling the creek to overflowing. The earth turned soft and workable, and everywhere Jonah looked, there were signs of life returning. Green shoots pushing through dead grass, birds building nests in the eaves, the world waking up from its long sleep. The first morning, warm enough to work outside without a heavy coat, Jonah and Rowan stood at the edge of the garden plot, surveying the winter damage and planning their strategy. "We'll need to expand it by at least a third," Rowan said, her hands on her hips. "With 3 of us to feed now, and if we want surplus for trade, we need more space. I can break new ground on the eastern side. Soil looks good there." Jonah crouched down and ran his fingers through the dirt. "Plant root vegetables in the new section. Potatoes, turnips, carrots, things that store well. And beans. Lots of beans." Rowan glanced at him, a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "You remember what you said that first morning I let you in the house? About not deserving help?" "I remember." "You were wrong, and I'm glad you were wrong." She reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. "Come on, these beds won't dig themselves." They worked side by side through the morning, turning earth that had been frozen for months, breaking up clods, removing rocks and roots. It was hard labor, the kind that left muscles aching and hands blistered, but there was satisfaction in it. Every shovelful of dirt was an investment in their future, a statement that they planned to be here when harvest came. Lark appeared around midday with water and bread, her face bright with excitement. "Guess what I found?" "What?" Rowan straightened up, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Baby rabbits! A whole nest of them by the creek. They're tiny and perfect, and—" She stopped, reading her mother's expression. "I didn't touch them, Ma. I promise. I just looked." "Good girl. Mama Rabbit will take care of them better than we could." "Can we check on them sometimes? Make sure they're okay?" "We can check from a distance, but they're wild creatures, Lark. They're not ours to keep." Lark nodded solemnly, but Jonah could see the longing in her eyes. She had such a big heart, this child. She wanted to save everything, tend everything, love everything. It was a gift and a danger all at once. After she'd run off to play, Rowan turned to Jonah with a wry smile. "She gets that from Thomas. He was always bringing home injured animals, trying to nurse them back to health. Drove me crazy sometimes the way he cared so much about everything." "Sounds like someone else I know," Jonah said pointedly. Rowan laughed. "Fair enough. I suppose caring runs in this family." This family. The word settled over Jonah like a warm blanket. He'd been here almost 6 months now, and somewhere along the way he'd stopped being a guest and become something more, something permanent. The planting took weeks. They worked dawn to dusk, preparing beds, planting seeds, building trellises for the beans and peas. Jonah's shoulder still ached sometimes, especially after long days of labor, but it was manageable. And Rowan had learned to read his movements, to know when he needed to stop and rest, even if he wouldn't admit it himself. "You're favoring that arm again," she said one afternoon, catching him rolling his shoulder. "It's fine." "It's not fine. Take a break, sit in the shade, and drink some water." When he opened his mouth to protest, she cut him off. "That's not a suggestion, Jonah. You push too hard and that infection could come back. Then where would we be? You'd manage." "I don't want to manage. I want you healthy and whole." She softened her tone. "Please. For me." He couldn't argue with that, so he sat under the old cottonwood tree and watched her work, marveling at her strength, her determination, the way she moved through the world with such fierce competence. She'd been broken when they met, still carrying the weight of Thomas's death like a stone around her neck. But she'd healed too, slowly, the same way the land healed after winter. One evening in late April, they sat on the porch steps watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Lark was inside, supposedly doing her letters, but probably drawing horses instead. "I've been thinking," Rowan said quietly. About? About the future. About what we're building here. She picked at a splinter in the wooden step. When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. Thought the best I could hope for was to survive long enough to raise Lark, to give her a chance at something better. I never imagined I'd want to actually live again. Jonah didn't say anything, just waited. He'd learned that Rowan needed space to work through her thoughts, to find the right words. But now, with you here, I find myself thinking about more than just survival. I think about expansion, about prosperity, about building something that could last generations. She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the sunset. I think about happiness. Real happiness, not just the absence of pain. You deserve happiness, Rowan. So do you. She reached over and took his hand, that familiar gesture that had become as natural as breathing. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. Jonah's heart started beating faster. I'm listening. I love you. The words came out simple and direct, no flourish or drama. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was when you rode back into that storm for Lark. Maybe it was all the quiet mornings working side by side. Maybe it was the day you let me give you Thomas's watch, and I saw you cry. But somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, and I need you to know. The world seemed to stop. Jonah stared at her, this strong, beautiful, complicated woman who'd saved his life and then trusted him with hers, and felt something break open in his chest. I love you too, he said, his voice rough. I've loved you for months, but didn't think I had the right to say it. Didn't think someone like me deserved someone like you. Stop that. Rowan's voice was firm but gentle. Stop thinking you don't deserve good things. You've earned everything you have here. You've earned my trust, my daughter's love, and yes, my heart too. She leaned in and kissed him, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as he responded. It was their first kiss, and it tasted like dirt and sweat and promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. I've wanted to do that for weeks, Rowan admitted, her cheeks flushed. Why didn't you? Because I was scared. Scared you didn't feel the same way. Scared of dishonoring Thomas's memory. Scared of what it meant to open my heart again after swearing I never would. She touched his face gently. But I realized something. Thomas wouldn't want me to stop living because he's gone. He'd want me to be happy. And you make me happy, Jonah. You and Lark both. What about Lark? How will she feel about this? As if summoned, the door opened and Lark stuck her head out. Are you two finally done being silly about each other? Because it's been obvious for months and I'm tired of pretending not to notice. Both adults turned to stare at her. Lark grinned, looking far too pleased with herself. You knew? Rowan asked. Ma, I'm 8, not blind. You smile at him different than you smile at other people, and Mr. Jonah looks at you like you hung the moon in stars. She came out onto the porch and squeezed between them. So are you getting married, or what? Lark! Rowan's face went bright red. It's a reasonable question. People who love each other get married. That's what you told me when I asked about you and Pa. Jonah couldn't help but laugh. Leave it to Lark to cut straight through all the complicated emotions to the heart of things. We haven't talked about marriage, little bird. Well, you should, because I already told the chickens they're getting a Pa, and I don't want to make them liars. Rowan buried her face in her hands, but Jonah could see she was smiling. He pulled both of them close, this child who'd saved him, and this woman who'd given him a reason to stay saved. How about we take things one step at a time, he suggested. First we get through planting season, then we can talk about the future. Fine, Lark agreed, but I'm telling you right now I want to be in the wedding, and I want to wear something pretty, not just my regular dress. Deal, Rowan said, emerging from her hands. Now go inside and actually finish your letters before bed. Lark skipped back into the house, humming to herself, leaving the adults alone again. She's going to be insufferable about this, you know, Rowan said. I know, and I love her for it. Jonah pulled Rowan back into his arms. But she's right about one thing. I would marry you, Rowan, tomorrow, if you'd have me. Not because we have to, but because I want to. Because I want to build a life with you officially, permanently. Ask me again after harvest, Rowan said softly, when we know we can really make this work. when we've proven we can survive a full year together. You don't trust what we have? I trust it completely. But I also know that love is easy when life is easy. I want to make sure we can handle hard times too, that we can fight and make up, struggle and survive, face whatever comes together. Jonah understood. She wasn't rejecting him. She was being practical, making sure they built something on solid ground rather than just hope and emotion. All right, after harvest. But I'm holding you to that. I'm counting on it. They sat together as the sun finished setting, their hands intertwined, and Jonah felt a peace he'd never known before. This was home. Not just a place, but a feeling, a belonging. The summer came with challenges that tested them in ways the winter hadn't. In late June, a drought settled over the region like a curse. Week after week passed with no rain, and their carefully planted crops began to wilt under the relentless sun. Jonah and Rowan took turns hauling water from the creek, bucket after bucket, trying to save what they could. It was exhausting work that left them both spent by day's end. But they developed a rhythm, working in shifts so one person could rest while the other worked. "We're going to lose the corn," Rowan said one evening, her voice flat with exhaustion. "It's too far gone." "Maybe, but the root vegetables are holding on, and the beans are tougher than they look." Jonah set down his bucket and flexed his aching hands. "We'll save what we can. And if it's not enough, then we'll make it enough. We'll hunt more, preserve everything, trade what we have for what we need." He moved behind her and started massaging her shoulders, feeling the knots of tension there. "We've survived worse than a drought, Rowan." She leaned back against him. "I know, I wanted this year to be perfect, wanted to prove we could thrive, not just survive. We are thriving. Look around. Look at what we've built in just a few months. A year ago you were alone. Now you've got help, got support, got someone who will haul water until his arms fall off to save your crops." "Our crops," she corrected. "Our crops," he agreed, and the word felt good. Ours. Theirs. Together. The drought finally broke in mid-July with a thunderstorm so violent it felt like the sky was trying to make up for lost time. Rain pounded the earth, turning the dry ground into rivers of mud. Lightning split the sky in jagged white lines, and thunder shook the house to its foundations. Lark huddled between Jonah and Rowan, trying to be brave but clearly scared. Jonah wrapped his arm around her. "It's all right, little bird. The storm's just noisy. It can't hurt us in here." "What about the garden?" "The garden's getting the drink it needs. Tomorrow we'll go check on everything, see what made it through." The storm raged through the night, and when morning came, they ventured out to survey the damage. Some plants had been battered by the wind and hail, but most had survived, and the earth, finally saturated with water, looked rich and dark and alive again. "We made it," Rowan said, relief evident in her voice. "We did." Jonah surveyed the rows of recovering plants. Lost some, but kept more. That's a win. Over the next weeks, the garden exploded with growth. Everything they'd fought to save rewarded their efforts with abundant produce. The beans climbed their trellises with aggressive enthusiasm. The tomatoes ripened faster than they could pick them. Even the corn, which they'd written off, rallied and produced decent ears. One afternoon in late July, a rider appeared on the horizon. Jonah saw him first and felt his whole body tense, old instincts kicking in. Strangers meant potential danger. Strangers meant the outside world intruding on their carefully built peace. "Rowan," he called out, his hand moving instinctively toward where his rifle leaned against the porch. She came out of the house, Lark behind her, and all three of them watched the rider approach. As he got closer, Jonah could see he was older, maybe 60, with a weathered face and the bearing of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who knew these lands well. He stopped about 20 feet from the house and tipped his hat. "Afternoon, folks. Name's Samuel Grant. I run the trading post about 15 miles east of here." "I know who you are," Rowan said, her voice neutral but not hostile. "What brings you out this way, Mr. Grant?" "Well, ma'am, I've been hearing stories about a woman out here running a successful homestead with help from a drifter she took in last fall. Folks were skeptical at first, thought maybe it was just talk. But then I started seeing your vegetables at market, better quality than anyone else's. Got curious. We're not interested in selling the land if that's what you're here for. No, ma'am, nothing like that. Lord knows this land's not worth much except to someone willing to work it like you folks do. Samuel shifted in his saddle. Actually, I'm here to make a business proposition. I've got customers asking for reliable suppliers of fresh produce, good food, grown proper, not the half-dead stuff some folks try to pass off. You seem to have a knack for it. I'm wondering if you'd be interested in a regular trade arrangement. Rowan glanced at Jonah. He gave a small nod, letting her take the lead but showing his support. What kind of arrangement? She asked carefully. I'd buy whatever surplus you can provide at fair market rates. Vegetables, eggs if you've got them, preserved goods come winter. In exchange, I can supply you with things you can't produce yourself. Tools, cloth, sugar, coffee, salt, building materials if you're looking to expand. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I've got my standard rates here if you want to take a look. Jonah walked forward and took the paper, scanning the numbers carefully. His eyebrows rose. These weren't just fair prices. They were generous. This seems high, he said bluntly. Why offer us such good terms? Samuel's weathered face creased into a smile. Because I'm old and tired of dealing with people who can't deliver what they promise. Half the folks around here will shake your hand on a deal and then disappear when it's time to produce. The other half produce garbage and expect top dollar for it. He looked between Jonah and Rowan. You two have a reputation already, reliable, hard-working, quality goods. That's worth paying for. He paused, his expression growing more serious. Also, I knew Thomas. Thomas Reed, your late husband, ma'am. Met him a few times when he'd come through for supplies. He was a good man, treated everyone fair, always had a kind word even when times were hard. What happened to him at Fort Robinson was a damn shame, a waste of a decent soul. Samuel's eyes moved to Lark. That his little girl? Yes, Rowan said quietly. She's got his eyes. Kind eyes. Samuel looked back at Rowan and Jonah. If I can help his widow and child prosper, help them build something good, well, that sits right with me. Thomas deserves to be remembered better than how he died. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Rowan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Thank you, Mr. Grant. That means more than you know. Call me Samuel, please. Mr. Grant makes me feel ancient. He dismounted with a slight groan. Mind if we talk details? I've got a proposal that might interest you. They spent the next 2 hours working out an agreement. Samuel would send a wagon once a month to collect whatever produce they had ready and deliver supplies they'd ordered. The first pickup would be in 2 weeks, giving them time to harvest and prepare. He'd also spread word in town that they were reliable suppliers, which could bring other business opportunities. One more thing, Samuel said as he prepared to leave. Winter's going to be hard this year. I can feel it in my bones, and my bones are never wrong. You'll want to preserve every bit of food you can, stock up on firewood, make sure your shelter's solid. I can help with supplies if you need them. We'll manage, Rowan said, but thank you for the warning. You've got a good setup here. Don't let pride stop you from asking for help if things get rough. Samuel swung back into his saddle with another groan. I'll see you folks in 2 weeks. And ma'am, sir, congratulations on what you're building. Not just the homestead, but the family. That's the real wealth. After he rode away, Rowan turned to Jonah with shining eyes. Do you realize what this means? This could change everything. We could actually build something sustainable here, something that lasts beyond just scratching out survival. We're already building something that lasts, Jonah said, pulling her close. But yes, this helps. This gives us options, security. We need to celebrate. Rowan looked toward the house where Lark was watching from the window. Tonight, we have a real meal. Use some of the sugar I've been saving. Make something special. Just that evening, they sat down to a dinner that felt like a feast, even though it was simple food. Rowan had made cornbread with honey, beans with bits of salt pork, and stewed tomatoes from the garden. For dessert, she'd made a sweet cobbler with preserved berries. Lark ate with the enthusiasm of someone who understood that good food was precious. This is the best dinner ever, she declared, her face smeared with berry juice. Don't talk with your mouth full, Rowan said, but she was smiling. Can I ask something? Lark swallowed her mouthful. Are we rich now? Jonah laughed. No, little bird, we're not rich. But we have enough, Rowan added. We have food, shelter, people who care about us. Some folks would say that makes us richer than kings. I think we're rich, Lark insisted. We've got everything that matters. Later, after Lark had been put to bed, Jonah and Rowan sat together by the fire. The night had turned cool, a hint of autumn in the air, even though it was still high summer. She's right, you know, Rowan said quietly. We do have everything that matters. We do. Jonah reached over and took her hand. And I want to make it official. I want to marry you, Rowan. Make this family real in every way. It's already real. I know. But I want the world to know it too. I want to stand up in front of witnesses and promise to love you and care for Lark and build this life together. He turned to face her fully. Harvest is still months away. I don't want to wait that long. Rowan studied his face in the firelight. You're sure? You're absolutely certain this is what you want? Because once we do this, once we make it official, there's no going back. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. She smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Then, yes, let's do it. Let's get married. When? 3 weeks. That gives us time to prepare, to let people know if we want witnesses. She squeezed his hand. Samuel can officiate if he's willing. He mentioned once that he was ordained back when he ran a small church. 3 weeks, Jonah repeated, feeling joy bubble up in his chest. I can wait 3 weeks. They told Lark the next morning over breakfast. Her reaction was everything they'd hoped for and more. Finally, she shouted, jumping up from her chair. I've been waiting forever. Can I be in the wedding? Can I wear something special? Can I help plan everything? Yes to all of it, Rowan said, laughing. But first, finish your breakfast. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation mixed with regular work. The garden still needed tending, the trade agreement with Samuel required careful planning, and daily life continued its demands. But underneath everything was a current of excitement, of anticipation. Rowan took one of her few nice dresses and altered it to fit better, staying up late by lamplight to make the adjustments. Jonah cleaned and pressed his best shirt, polished his boots until they shone, and tried not to feel nervous about the enormity of what they were about to do. Lark was involved in every aspect of the planning, offering opinions on everything from what flowers to pick to what food to serve. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and even Rowan's practical nature couldn't resist getting caught up in the joy of it. Samuel arrived a week before the wedding with the first trade pickup. He was delighted to hear about the wedding and immediately agreed to perform the ceremony. It would be my honor, he said warmly. I'll bring my wife too if that's all right. She'd love to meet you folks. The more the merrier, Rowan said. The day before the wedding, Rowan's nervousness finally showed. What if I'm making a mistake, she asked Jonah as they worked together in the garden. What if I'm dishonoring Thomas's memory? What if… Stop. Jonah set down his hoe and took her hands. Look at me. Thomas was a good man who loved you and Lark. Do you really think he'd want you to spend the rest of your life alone, grieving, refusing to let yourself be happy? No, she admitted. He'd want me to move forward, to live. Then that's what you're doing. You're not replacing him, Rowan. You're not forgetting him. You're just choosing to keep living, to build something new while still honoring what came before. He touched the pocket watch in his vest pocket. You gave me this. His watch. That told me everything I needed to know about how you feel, about what you're ready for. Rowan's eyes filled with tears. I do love you, Jonah. So much it scares me sometimes. I love you too, and tomorrow we're going to stand up and promise to face whatever comes together. Whatever fears we have, whatever doubts, we'll work through them. Together. She kissed him then, long and deep, and when they pulled apart, she was smiling again. Tomorrow, she said, tomorrow we become a family in every way that matters. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the sky a brilliant blue without a single cloud. Jonah woke early, too nervous to sleep, and spent the morning making sure everything was perfect. He swept the porch, arranged chairs, picked wildflowers that Lark had designated as acceptable decorations. Samuel arrived mid-morning with his wife Martha, a round woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She immediately took charge of the food preparations, working alongside Rowan in the kitchen while Samuel kept Jonah company outside. Nervous? The older man asked. Terrified, Jonah admitted. That's normal. I was shaking so hard during my own wedding I could barely get the words out. Samuel chuckled. But it's good terror, the kind that means you understand how important this is. I don't want to fail her. I don't want to let her down. Then you won't. It's that simple. Marriage isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. You've already proven you can do that. Everything else is just details. The ceremony was set for early afternoon when the light was soft and golden. Rowan emerged from the house wearing her altered dress, simple but beautiful, with Lark beside her in a dress that Martha had somehow produced from her wagon. A pretty blue thing with white trim that made the child look older than her 8 years. But Jonah only had eyes for Rowan. She was radiant, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical braid, her eyes bright with emotion. When she took his hand, he felt his nervousness disappear, replaced by absolute certainty. Samuel opened a worn Bible and began, We're gathered here today to join these two people in marriage. Now, I knew Thomas Reed, Rowan's first husband, and he was a fine man. A man of conscience who died trying to do right in a world that often punishes such things. And I believe with all my heart that Thomas would approve of this union, that he'd be glad his wife and daughter found someone good to stand beside them. Rowan's hand tightened in Jonah's, and he saw tears on her cheeks. Marriage is a covenant, Samuel continued, a promise to stand together through whatever comes, joy and sorrow, plenty and want, health and sickness. It's choosing every single day to love and honor and care for each other even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. He looked at Jonah. Jonah Hale, do you take this woman to be your wife? Do you promise to love her, protect her, stand beside her for all the days of your life? I do. Jonah's voice was clear and strong. With everything I am, I do. And Rowan Reed, do you take this man to be your husband? Do you promise to love him, support him, build a life together for all the days of your life? I do. Rowan's voice wavered but didn't break. I absolutely do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Jonah, you may kiss your bride. Jonah pulled Rowan close and kissed her gently, aware of Lark watching, of Samuel and Martha smiling, of this moment that would change everything and nothing all at once. When they pulled apart, Lark was cheering, and Martha was crying happy tears, and Samuel was beaming like a proud father. Ladies and gentlemen, Samuel announced, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Jonah Hale. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Martha had brought a small cake, a luxury that made Lark's eyes go wide. They ate and talked and laughed, and for a few hours the hardships of frontier life faded away, replaced by pure happiness. As the sun began to set, Samuel and Martha prepared to leave. You've got something good here, Martha said to Rowan, embracing her warmly. Hold on to it, nurture it. Don't let the hard times steal your joy. I won't, Rowan promised. After they'd gone, the new family sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. Lark was between them, drowsy from excitement and cake, leaning against Jonah's side. Are you happy, Ma? She asked sleepily. Happier than I've been in years, baby. What about you, Pa? She'd started calling him that immediately after the ceremony, testing out the word with obvious delight. The happiest, Jonah said, stroking her hair. The absolute happiest. Lark smiled and closed her eyes. Within minutes she was asleep, and Jonah carefully carried her inside and tucked her into bed. When he returned to the porch, Rowan was still sitting there, looking out at the darkened land. What are you thinking? He asked, settling beside her. That a year ago I was alone and afraid. My husband was dead, my future looked bleak, and I couldn't see any way forward except just surviving day by day. She turned to him. And now I'm married again. To a good man who loves my daughter and works beside me and makes me laugh. It feels like a dream. It's not a dream, it's real. We're real. I know, and that's the most miraculous part. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Thank you, Jonah, for staying, for choosing us, for being the man you are. Thank you for seeing something worth saving in a broken-down soldier who'd given up on life. They sat in comfortable silence, Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd built something good from the wreckage of their pasts. The autumn came with its demands of harvest. Every day from dawn to dusk, they worked to bring in the crops they'd fought so hard to grow. The root cellar filled with potatoes, turnips, carrots. The shelves lined with jars of preserved vegetables, pickles, jams. The grain bins held wheat and corn. Everything they'd need to survive the coming winter and more. Samuel's monthly visits became a constant, and the trade relationship flourished. Word spread about their reliable supply of quality produce, and soon other merchants were approaching them with offers. But they stayed loyal to Samuel, who'd given them their first real chance. One crisp October morning, Rowan was slower than usual getting out of bed. Jonah noticed her pale face, the way she held herself carefully. "You all right?" "Just tired. We've been working hard." But over the next week, the fatigue continued. She started feeling nauseous in the mornings, turning green at the smell of coffee, and Jonah, who'd lived through enough to recognize the signs, began to suspect. "Rowan," he said gently one evening after Lark had gone to bed, "are you pregnant?" She looked at him with wide eyes, and he saw the answer there before she spoke. "I think so. I'm not certain yet, but all the signs point to it." Her hand went to her stomach. "I know we didn't plan this, didn't specifically talk about having children together, but it's perfect." Jonah crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. "It's absolutely perfect." "You're not worried about bringing a child into this uncertain world?" "The world's always uncertain, but we've proven we can handle whatever comes. We've survived drought and storms and our own demons. We'll handle this too." He pulled back to look at her face. "We're going to have a baby, Rowan. We're going to add to this family we've built. How could I be anything but grateful?" She laughed, relieved, and kissed him hard. "Lark's going to lose her mind with excitement. Let's tell her at dinner tomorrow. Make it special." They told her over breakfast instead, unable to wait. Lark's reaction was everything they'd expected and more. She shrieked, jumped up and down, demanded to know if it would be a brother or sister, asked if she could help name the baby, and generally made plans for the next 9 months without pausing for breath. "I'm going to be the best big sister," she declared. "I'll teach them everything, how to climb trees and catch frogs and talk to chickens and read and write, and how about we wait until they're born before you start the advanced lessons?" Rowan suggested, laughing. "Can we tell Samuel and Martha? They'll be so excited." "We'll tell them when they come for the next trade visit." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the autumn and into winter. Rowan's belly grew round, and Jonah found himself marveling at the miracle of it, that two broken people could create new life, that from all their scars and pain, something innocent and perfect could emerge. They prepared a corner of the bedroom for the baby, with Jonah building a small cradle from smooth pine. Lark helped paint it white, and decorated it with careful drawings of animals and flowers. Samuel and Martha brought soft blankets and tiny clothes when they came for the monthly trade, gifts from Martha, who remembered what it was like to have babies. "You're glowing," Martha told Rowan one December afternoon. "Pregnancy suits you." "I feel like I'm carrying a watermelon," Rowan laughed. "But yes, I'm happy, happier than I ever thought I'd be again." Winter settled in hard, just as Samuel had predicted. The snow came early and deep, piling in drifts against the house. But they were prepared. The root cellar was full, the woodpile was stacked high, and the house was tight and warm against the cold. On the longest nights, they gathered by the fire, Jonah, Rowan, and Lark, and told stories or read books or just sat in comfortable silence. Sometimes Jonah would feel the baby kick under his hand as he rested it on Rowan's belly, and the reality of it would overwhelm him. He was going to be a father, not just to Lark, though he loved her as his own, but to this new life that was part him and part Rowan. In late February, on a night when the wind howled and snow fell thick and fast, Rowan's labor began. Jonah had helped birth animals, but this was entirely different. This was his wife, his child, and he felt terrified and useless in equal measure. But Rowan was strong, and she'd done this before. She walked and breathed and labored through the night while Jonah boiled water and gathered clean cloths and tried not to panic. Lark stayed in her room like she'd been told, but he could hear her moving around, unable to sleep, worried about her mother. You're doing great, Jonah kept saying, feeling helpless. You're so strong. Tell me something, Rowan gasped between contractions. Tell me something good, something to focus on. So Jonah talked. He told her about the spring planting they'd do, about the foal he'd seen at Samuel's place that might be for sale, about teaching their child to ride and read and be kind, about growing old together on this land they'd claimed, about everything good he could imagine, painting a future with his words while she brought that future into being. Just before dawn, with the first light touching the horizon, a baby's cry filled the house. Jonah rushed to Rowan's side to find her exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of Martha's blankets. It's a boy, she said softly, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. We have a son. Jonah approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the small red face, the tiny fists waving in the air, the dark hair plastered to the small head. His son. He had a son. Can I hold him? He's yours. Of course you can hold him. Jonah took the baby with infinite care, terrified of dropping this precious thing. The infant opened dark eyes and seemed to look right at him, and Jonah felt his heart crack wide open with a love so fierce it was almost painful. Hello, little one, he whispered, his voice breaking. Welcome to the world. You're safe here. You're loved here. I promise I'll do everything I can to protect you and give you a good life. I promise I'll be the father you deserve. The baby made a small sound, and Jonah laughed through tears he didn't bother to hide. Lark burst into the room, unable to wait any longer. Is it here? Can I see? Is Ma okay? Everyone's fine, Rowan assured her. Come meet your brother. Lark climbed onto the bed carefully and peered at the baby in Jonah's arms. Her face lit up with wonder. He's so small, and he's got hair. All babies have hair, Rowan said, smiling. What are we going to name him? Jonah and Rowan exchanged a glance. They discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at this tiny person who represented their future, the answer seemed obvious. Thomas, Jonah said quietly, looking at Rowan for confirmation, after the man who made all of this possible. Rowan's eyes filled with tears. You want to name our son after my first husband? He was a good man who died trying to do right. He deserves to be remembered. And maybe this Thomas will grow up to be just as good, but with the chance to live a long life. Jonah touched the baby's soft cheek. Thomas Grant Hale, to honor the past and celebrate the future. It's perfect, Rowan whispered. He would have loved that, would have been honored. Can I hold him? Lark asked eagerly. They settled her carefully with pillows and laid baby Thomas in her arms. She looked down at him with such fierce love that Jonah felt his throat tighten. I'm going to protect you, she told the baby seriously. I'm going to make sure nothing bad ever happens to you. I'm going to be the best big sister in the whole world. You're going to have such a good life, little Thomas. I promise. The months that followed were exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Baby Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he still demanded constant attention. Rowan nursed him while Jonah took over more of the household tasks. Lark helped with everything, eager to prove she could be trusted with her baby brother. Spring arrived, and with it came the need to plant again. But this year felt different. This year they weren't just surviving or even just thriving. They were building something that would outlast them, a legacy for their children. Jonah worked the fields while Rowan tended the baby, and Lark helped both of them. Samuel's visits continued, and he brought news that their reputation had spread even further. People were asking specifically for produce from the Hale homestead, willing to pay premium prices for the quality they'd come to expect. You've built something special here, Samuel told them one afternoon, bouncing baby Thomas on his knee while Martha chatted with Rowan. Most folks out here are just trying to get by. You're actually prospering. That's rare. We've been blessed, Rowan said, and Jonah knew she meant it in every sense. Blessed with good land, hard work, and each other. By summer, they'd expanded the garden yet again, and Jonah had built a proper chicken coop that could house twice as many birds. They acquired the 2 dairy goats they'd talked about, and Lark took charge of them with typical enthusiasm, naming them Daisy and Belle and treating them like pets. One warm July evening, Jonah stood at the edge of their property, looking out at everything they'd created. The house was larger now, with proper rooms for each child. The barn stood solid and strong. The fields stretched green and productive. Chickens clucked contentedly in their coop. The goats grazed peacefully in their pen. And from the house came the sound of laughter, Rowan's laugh mixing with Lark's, and baby Thomas's gurgling response. This was it. This was everything he'd never known to hope for. A family, a home, a purpose, a future that didn't just exist, but beckoned with possibility. Rowan came out to join him, Thomas on her hip. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how I almost missed all of this. How close I came to dying that day at the trading post, never knowing any of you, never experiencing any of this." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, about how grateful I am that a barefoot little girl decided a dying stranger was worth saving. "We all saved each other," Rowan said, echoing Lark's wisdom from so long ago. "That's what families do." They stood together watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors, their son between them, their daughter visible through the window working on her lessons, their land stretching out in all directions. 2 years later, Rowan gave birth to their daughter, Sarah, who came into the world with Jonah's dark hair and a stubborn streak that showed up before she could even walk. The house grew more crowded and more joyful. Lark, now 12, was less child than young woman, helping run the household with quiet competence that made both parents proud. She was teaching Thomas his letters, reading to him every night, and already planning to teach Sarah everything she knew. The homestead prospered beyond their wildest dreams. What had started as survival became success. They had money saved, livestock thriving, fields producing abundantly. But more than any material wealth, they had each other. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were settled, Jonah and Rowan would sit on the porch they'd expanded twice now and marvel at the life they'd built. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Rowan asked one such evening. "All the time. Sometimes I still can't quite believe it's real." "What part?" "All of it. That you love me. That these children call me father. That I get to wake up every morning in this place we've built together." He took her hand. "That I'm happy. After everything, after all the pain and loss and mistakes, I'm actually genuinely happy." "Me too." Rowan squeezed his hand. 5 years ago, I thought my life was over. Thought the best I could hope for was to survive long enough to raise Lark. And now you have 3 children, a thriving homestead, and a husband who loves you more than anything in the world." "And now I have everything," she agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was helping Sarah catch fireflies, their laughter ringing out clear and bright. Lark was reading under a tree, but she looked up occasionally to smile at her siblings. This was what grew after fire, Jonah thought. Not just survival, but life in its fullest, richest form. Love that endured. Family that stayed. Hope that refused to die no matter how much darkness tried to smother it. He'd been a broken man when Lark found him, ready to give up, seeing no reason to keep breathing. But she'd asked him to meet her mother, and he'd said yes, and that single decision had led to all of this. Sometimes salvation came quietly, in the voice of a child. Sometimes healing happened slowly, over seasons of shared work and growing trust. Sometimes family wasn't about blood, but about choice, about who you decided to stand beside when the storms came. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got a second chance to become the person you should have been all along. Jonah Hale had taken that chance, and in taking it, he'd discovered that broken things could be mended, that lost souls could be found, and that endings could become beginnings if you were brave enough to keep going. The stars came out one by one, brilliant against the darkening sky. The children's laughter faded as bedtime approached. Rowan leaned her head on Jonah's shoulder with the ease of long familiarity, and Jonah thought about that barefoot little girl who'd appeared out of nowhere one dusty evening and asked a dying stranger a simple question. "You look tired, mister. Want to meet my ma?" That question had saved him. His answer, that weary, hopeless yes, had given him everything, and every day since he'd been grateful for both.